Hello, ladies and gentlemen. This is Luke Johnson from Noetic, the intelligent social media platform. I'm back with Dr. Jonathan Cook. We are discussing today The House of Mirth by Edith Wharton. It is our second installment in our series of the exploration of Wharton. I believe we talked about The Age of Innocence once before, and I think it'll at least be a tripartite series. Dr. Cook, you mentioned another book that you're interested in because you're doing some research on Edith Wharton that we made to talk about next month. What was it again?
Yeah, The Mother's Recompense.
The Mother's Recompense.
It was written after The Age of Innocence. It's a wonderful study of the pitfalls of Eros, like many of her books.
All right. Well, I'm looking forward to that. But today we're going to be talking about House of Mirth. My impression of House of Mirth was like The Age of Innocence. It's beautifully written. I really don't think many writers, male or female, compare to Edith Wharton. She's spectacular. I don't really know how she does it. The conceptual things that I would say about it were that it's a great aperture into what high society and its trappings were like during that time. And I think that it effectively communicates what the main character experiences as the result of what it's like to be upwardly mobile and downwardly mobile within this society. But I think Dr. Cook is going to help us understand some of the finer points of the novel, not only its historical background, but some of the larger philosophical motifs that are within it. So I guess, why don't you start us off kind of telling us about how this book came to be?
Yeah, so Edith Wharton, she was born in 1862. So 1902, she's 40 years old. And she is just in the process of constructing this beautiful home in Lenox, Massachusetts called the Mount, which you can visit today. And it's been restored to look pretty much like it was when Wharton lived there. So she's living up there with her husband Teddy, although she still spends a lot of time in New York, and she also goes to Europe at least once a year because her family is just immensely rich. And in October 1903, she begins this new novel. She didn't have the name for it at first. She had a couple of other names before she decided on The House of Mirth. Which of course comes from the book of Ecclesiastes, the 7th chapter. There's a saying there that the heart of the wise is in the house of mourning, and the heart of the fools is in the house of mirth. In other words, the house of mirth is not like everyone is laughing all the time, because they aren't. It's just the house of mirth represents the frivolous upper echelons of society where people do foolish things, and a lot of times they don't pay for them.
I just looked it up. I do remember when I read the Bible for the second time this summer, coming across that, and it stuck out to me. It's Ecclesiastes 7:4 for anyone that's interested.
Yeah. In fact, there's a good article on Ecclesiastes, actually 2 or 3 articles. One of them reads all of chapter 7 of the book of Ecclesiastes and notices that there's virtually every line of that chapter, which isn't very long, applies to the novel in terms of, this is called wisdom literature in the Bible, which is sort of the higher wisdom. And basically Ecclesiastes is sort of a skeptic's view of human life and the fact that life goes on after you die. There's no resurrection, of course. In this world, God is kind of a remote figure. There's not necessarily going to be justice to everyone. Everyone, no matter if you're great or unimportant in life, you're going to be forgotten. So it's kind of a pessimistic, skeptical view of human existence, but it's got a message of enjoyment. In other words, while you're living this life, you should enjoy it by eating and drinking and living a good life. I mean, it doesn't mean you sort of overdo it in that area, but it means that you can enjoy your life. It's just that it's all very fleeting and transient, and it's, you know, the idea of vanity is important. The phrase "the vanity of vanities" comes from Ecclesiastes,
Right.
So you could see that, you know, applying to Lily Bart as a kind of a proof text for her life.
Well, I think you're right, and I would qualify that a little bit. I think there's more to the wisdom literature, but that's a whole other conversation. If anyone's interested in the wisdom literature, I'm also reading the Apocrypha right now.
Yeah.
Have you read the Apocrypha before?
Yeah.
And so I just finished the Wisdom of Solomon, and I'm in Ecclesiasticus now, or Sirach.
Sirach, yeah.
So, and I highly recommend people from literature backgrounds, secular backgrounds, religious backgrounds to check them out. The most interesting thing about the wisdom literature, which is a real humdinger, I think, for those of us that are interested in theology, is the personification of wisdom as feminine.
Yeah.
And that's something one day when I write my own book dealing with time and the Bible, I imagine I'll have to wrestle with, because oftentimes the identification of wisdom as feminine starts to mean that there might be a feminine aspect to the Trinity. But that is a whole other aspect, a whole other conversation.
Yeah.
I just thought I would inject that for a second. And there is a great deal in the wisdom literature about temporal blessing and curses, and those blessings being the result of fear of God. So I wouldn't say it's a hedonistic sort of wisdom literature.
No. Well, I mean, the major wisdom, higher wisdom is Job and Ecclesiastes. I mean, Book of Proverbs is sort of practical wisdom, which is if you do this, you get X.
Yeah.
Higher wisdom is you do this and you don't know if X is going to come out, because life is so unpredictable.
Right.
So anyway, let's continue with our So Edith Wharton is at the Mount. She's living with her husband, Teddy. Now, Teddy and Edith have a non-sexual relationship. They got married in the early 80s. He was significantly older than she was. He was a friend of her brother's from Boston, from the Wharton family. And but he was kind of an ornamental husband. Yeah.
What, the Wharton family, is this any connection to the business family?
The Wharton School, yeah, but they were based in Boston at this time.
She's related to the UPenn Business School
through her husband's family, yeah, who gave money to that institution. So she's up there. She's spending a lot of time socializing, but she's dedicating her mornings to her work. And the book is published in October 1905. And it kind of makes her reputation as a novelist, even though, you know, she'd written The Valley of Decision, which is an historical novel set in 18th century Italy. She wrote that, published that in 1900. But this book was kind of her breakthrough work, and you know, it made people aware of the fact that she was a serious writer and not just a society novelist at the time. And at this point, she was also friends with Henry James, who visited her at the Mount, and she spent a lot of time with him in Europe and in England. She used to take him on these long motor tours with her cars that she had available with a chauffeur. So anyway, the book is published, and you know, it represents kind of a sea change in her literary career. Made her much better known. So,
so how autobiographical is the House of Mirth, given what you've told us so far?
Well, a lot of Wharton, if you know her life, she puts in little snippets of her experiences here and there, people, stories she's heard. This book there's just little pieces here and there. I mean, there's no one character who's directly modeled on someone. I mean, the character of Lawrence Seldon, who's this non-committal bachelor figure, kind of matches up with a guy named Walter Berry, who was friends of hers, who came from Albany, and he ended up as he pretty much is an international lawyer. He eventually goes to Cairo to serve on an international court there, and then after that he goes to Paris, where he's friends with Edith Wharton there. Lily Bart, I mean, there are aspects of Wharton, I think, in terms of the love of luxury. I mean, there's definitely that aspect of Wharton, but she always had superb taste, so I mean, she had the money to spend on pretty much anything she wanted, so she never lacked for good clothes or beautiful houses and furniture. But I think she's just sort of a creation of Wharton's mind about what might have happened to her if she didn't come from this very wealthy family and wasn't given an inheritance.
How? What? You're reading. You mentioned before our interviews got started that you're reading a biography of Edith Wharton.
Yeah.
Would you recommend it? Is it something you'd be willing to share with our audience?
Well, there's several biographies. The first important one was by R.W.B. Lewis, which came out in the 70s, and that was important because it blew open some secret aspects to her life, which is that she had a very passionate affair with an American journalist named Morton Fullerton in Paris in 1908 and 09, because this was not known until he wrote about it, because the letters, the papers were sealed at Yale, and they were suddenly available for him to write that. But since then, there have been several biographies. The most recent one is by Hermione Lee, who is a very good Oxford or Cambridge-based professor, and there are two or three other ones. I mean, there's a really great pictorial biography called Edith Wharton, An Extraordinary Life, because you really learn a lot when you see all the beautiful houses she lived in, and the clothing, and the society events that she knew about, and all the intellectuals and other society people that she knew. I mean, she just had an amazing life.
This relationship that she had with Henry James is most fascinating. Is there a book that examines that friendship?
Yeah, definitely. I haven't read it, but definitely at least a couple of books about her relationship with James, and but so there's a Wharton industry, and there's a Edith Wharton publication comes out as well. So
I guess so. Yeah, we were talking about this before. How I tried to find the movie, but I guess they made a movie version. Not only did they make a version in the 90s for House of Mirth, but I think they made like a silent movie or something like that. And
there was a play version, and I think there was a silent movie in the 20s. The most recent movie was 2000, with a not very well known actress. I think Gillian Anderson or something. Yeah.
Oh yeah, the
Gillian
redhead
Anderson.
from X-Files.
Yeah.
That's kind of a weird choice.
Yeah, that's what people said, I think.
It's like, are there going to be UFOs in this version?
Yeah.
I'm so, we read so many wonderful authors and talk about them, and I have respect for them all, but Wharton really sticks out. Was there something special about her upbringing or her training that made her so gifted? I mean, how do you account for her particular genius? What's your take on it? I know you can't give an exhaustive explanation of it, but
yeah,
does she jut out to you as she does to me? She seems to be
Yeah.
kind of in a league of her own.
Well, she was pretty much educated at home, and you know, her family took her to Europe for about, I think, 6 years, a few years after she was born. So she got just kind of the most incredible international exposure as a kid to the great cultural riches of the world, and she was a voracious reader. So she She read literature. She read history, science, and I just think she had a incredible appetite for culture. I mean, she just wanted to know her world.
Did she get
So
that from her
well.
mother, her father?
No, but that's the thing. Her parents were, her father had a decent library, which she read through totally, but she saw her father as kind of a tragic man who never really developed himself. It's almost like he was a victim of marrying into this, I mean, he came from a well-established family, but I think she thought of her father as kind of tragically undeveloped intellectually. Her mother was kind of a no-nonsense Victorian matron, not at all intellectual. And her mother was really kind of a negative influence on her life, because her mother didn't tell her anything about the facts of life. I mean, when Edith went to her, she was engaged to Teddy Wharton, and she said, "Well, Mom, what should I do on my wedding night?" And her mother said, "Well, you've been to museums, haven't you looked at the statues? Men and women are built differently, and how can you ask that question?" So her mother just sort of, blew her off. And people think as a result Wharton was so shocked on her wedding night by, the facts of life that she never recovered, because she had a pretty much sexless marriage with Teddy. And her first great love was this guy, Morton Fullerton, in 1908, when she's 46 years old in Paris. No, but she was very gifted in languages, so she read French, she read German, she read Italian, so she was not only read the important authors of the day. Of course, she's reading Hawthorne as like the major American novelist of her youth. Of course, Melville was not at all known. And she's reading Emerson, Thoreau, and the American sort of fireside poets, but she's also reading Balzac and Stendhal. One of her favorite books is the Charterhouse of Parma of Stendhal. So she's very well grounded in French literature. And she's very taken with Goethe because she had very good training in German as well. And so she maintains this kind of international hub of cultural activities. Wherever she's living, people are coming and visiting her, and bringing her the latest ideas and books and things. So she had the money to do it, which is not many people could who are that intellectually gifted had the money to become a sort of social center like she maintained.
Right. Seems like a lot of favorable things came together.
Yeah. Although she was kind of miserably unhappy in her marriage. I mean, she constantly thought of herself as being a prisoner of her married life, and the fact that she and her husband he was not at all intellectual. I mean, their interests were traveling and good food and wine and dogs. They both loved dogs. So you see these pictures of Edith Wharton.
Oh yeah, that's
early
right.
on, she's got dogs on her shoulder, perched there, and dogs in her lap. Anyway.
Yeah, I forgot. We talked about that last time, and those pictures are pretty wonderful.
Yeah,
I think they're in the public domain on Wikipedia if anybody wants to look them up.
Yeah,
they're
amusing.
They're cute. They're pretty cute. So, I think our listeners can get a fair sense of the social milieu of the novel from this period of time, but what may we have left out that can titillate their imagination, take them there?
Well, you really have to know something about what is the Gilded Age in America, and just the vast inequalities that created the society that Wharton is writing about. I mean, she is focusing on the New York world. You don't really hear, she doesn't name drop about Astors or Rockefellers or Vanderbilts, who are the big, or Carnegies. They're sort of on the sidelines. But that world is really pretty much what she's describing. And I'll give you an example, which is that in 1900, the 4,000 richest families in America owned as much as the 11 million families that made up the rest of the country. So in the most extraordinary concentrations of wealth at the top. And
I do feel like there was a Rothschild reference. Or am I imagining that? Was there a Rothschild reference? I don't know. I feel like there was one name drop.
Yeah. I mean, but you get a sense that these people are people who are in this world, but there are hundreds of these wealthy people in New York besides the names that we all know today. But one of the interesting things to do to get a feel for the background of this book is to visit some of these Hudson River estates, like Bellamont, which is where Lily goes at the beginning of the book when she goes up to stay with the Trenners, Judy Trenner and Gus Trenner, and it's based on these amazing houses that were built along the Hudson River between, say, Poughkeepsie and up north of there. There's a particular house just south of Rhinebeck, which I think was the model for Bellamont. Just sweeping grounds and huge rooms. You can still visit a lot of these houses and get a sense of just the extraordinary money that was needed to keep up these places. So the basic fact is that this was a vastly unequal society where the wealthy people could just revel in their money because they didn't have an income tax, there was no corporation taxes, there was minimal taxation of these huge fortunes that allowed them to just have these huge estates and buy their yachts and go to Europe. And of course, a lot of the young women were going to Europe, and some of them were getting picked up by the upper class British royalty and aristocracy, marrying into that world at this point. There was a lot of interbreeding going on between wealthy women, American women, and aristocratic English people. So you can kind of think about today's world of billionaires and oligarchs as somewhat comparable. I mean, of course, the amount of money that's around today is magnified astronomically, but that world of inequality where you have poor people like the woman who sells Lily the letters of Seldon, the woman who cleans, the charwoman whose husband has been laid off and needs money, and the people at the peak of society. So I tell you, if you want to get a sense of the world, of what a world of vast social and economic inequalities looks like, you read The House of Mirth, and then you read The Jungle of Upton Sinclair, which was also published in 1905. And there, you have a working class hero, Jurgis Rudkus, immigrant in Chicago, and you get a whole picture of society from the bottom and from the top. And it's not a very pretty picture.
We covered The Jungle, didn't we?
Yeah, we did The Jungle. Yeah.
Yeah. So what do you make of Lily Bart?
Well, I don't know. A lot.
You like her?
I don't really feel that much connection with her because, I think she's was there to make a point. She was bred to be a husband hunter and not settle for anything because of what her mother taught her. Marry a rich man because you don't want to end up like your me with your father who's had a kind of experience downward social mobility. But I mean, we constantly want her to find happiness and love. She just is always kind of the victim of her social milieu. She thinks she has to stick to it because she's sooner or later the husband is going to turn up. But the more she hangs out with these friends, the more kind of inadvertent problems she causes herself, and she's pretty much a scapegoat for the friends that she thinks are there to help expose her to the right, husband. The beginning of the book, of course, is Percy Grice, this kind of rich guy, mommy's boy, that she has no interest in, whom she has no interest in, and of course that doesn't come off because she spends time talking to Lawrence Seldon, and then Bertha Dorset tells Percy Grice that Lily, likes card playing, and so I think she inspires sympathy, but we don't really identify that closely with her unless we're kind of someone in her same position. I guess women would definitely more identify with her as sort of being stuck in this prison of either marrying a rich man or becoming someone's mistress. I don't know, or becoming a working woman. She was supposed to be given an inheritance by her aunt, Julia Peniston. So she got screwed over by her aunt, and if that didn't happen, she wouldn't have fallen so far, I guess. So appearances were against her.
Well, it'd be interesting, like you said, if we had different, we're two men, two white men here talking about Lily Bart, and we're talking about, well, do we like her? Is she sympathetic? I think, on the one hand, we can talk about her bringing a lot of these issues, whether it be the gambling scenario and the consequences of that upon herself. But then, if there were women discussing this right now, they might say she's a rightfully sympathetic protagonist because ultimately she's exposing the stifling nature of
a double standard for men. Yeah. It was interesting to think about her. The peak moment for her in the book is when she engages in that tableau vivant. She plays the role of Mrs. Lloyd in a painting by Sir Joshua Reynolds, who, it's a picture of a woman, an attractive woman in a kind of filmy gown, standing next to a tree, carving initials into a tree, and she models that painting for the audience, and of course she's probably wearing some very filmy clothing, and so she's kind of advertising herself. I mean, it's weird because she's imitating a famous work of art, but she's also advertising her beauty and her figure, because all the guys in the audience are saying, "Wow, I never knew Lily had that. Was so shapely." And ironically, it's that very night that she has this, Gus Trenor. She's summoned to their house in New York because she thinks she's going to be meeting up with the wife, and Trenor's wife is not there. He's called her because he wants her to sleep with him. So ironically, the result of her showing her beauty off is that she's given this ordeal of trying to fend off this dirty old man who thinks she owes him something for the money that he's been giving her, because she asked for some stock tips and he said he would invest for her. Well, it turns out the money's coming from his own pocket. So it's the money that he's given her that she realizes she has to pay off to vindicate her honor for what has happened there. And that's, of course, comes up at the end of the book when she's finally able to pay him off with a check from her inheritance.
earlier when we were talking about the name dropping of the moneyed families or whatever, it turns out, I don't know if this is mentioned in the text, but in the Penguin version of House of Mirth, the painting of Mrs. Lloyd belonged in the collection of the Rothschilds.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So
That's what I'm getting from the introduction of the Penguin edition. I can't remember if that's said explicitly or not, but I think that's part of the reason why I thought that was the one
yeah,
moneyed family that was dropped in it.
yeah. Well, it's interesting that this is like an important moment in the House of Mirth, where she's imitating this well-known society woman. And The Age of Innocence, of course, is the title of the novel is after a Joshua Reynolds painting of a child, so I guess Wharton.
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, well, I've never heard of this. I'm not like the biggest consumer of art history, so
yeah.
But
well, Reynolds.
My exposure to the painter Reynolds has been through both of Edith Wharton's books.
Yeah, well, he was a leading British painter, portraitist mainly. He was president of the Royal Academy in the later 18th century and friends with Samuel Johnson. So he hung out with a bunch of literary people, and so he was a classicist, a neoclassical painter who painted the aristocracy pretty much of England.
It's a fantastic painting.
Yeah.
This is my first time seeing it. I'm just looking at it.
Yeah, she's sort of standing there with this very fluid gown around her next to a tree, right? She has almost
This is a great painting.
Yeah.
This is a great painting.
So this was part of the entertainment to imitate these paintings, to do kind of living paintings. And
interesting.
Of course, after that event, she goes into the conservatory at the Wellington Bry house. And that's when Lawrence Seldon basically tells her, he wants to marry her, or he kisses her, and it's clear that marriage may be a prospect now for her, but that's when everything blows up because Seldon sees her coming out of the Dorset, the Trenor mansion in New York, alone and getting into a cab, meaning he thinks that she's got something going with Trenor, Gus Trenor, and that makes him not show up for a meeting the next day, and blows a hole in their matrimonial prospects. And she's rescued at that point by going to be a companion of the Dorsets on their yacht in the Mediterranean. That kind of saves her from that situation. Halfway through the book.
Right. So you mentioned a little bit about Lawrence Seldon. I wondered if you could elaborate upon his depiction, be it positive or negative.
Yeah, if you read the critical literature, there's a lot of feminist critics don't like him because they think that he's shallow, or he's disapproving of her, or he's a cad. But I think in general, I feel more sympathetic to him because he really, he admires Lily Bart, but she makes it clear most of the time that he doesn't have enough money to be interested in him. And of course, no guy wants to be too emotionally invested in a woman who they know has no interest in them. But he maintains his sort of friendly interest and tries to sort of make her aware of the world of the mind. He talks about this republic of the spirit, which is, if you're part of, in this society, you can still maintain your independence by reading and thinking your way out of this world, which is, of course, what Wharton herself did. The only thing I wonder about, and I think a lot of readers probably wonder, is that how Seldon could have had a relationship with Bertha Dorset, who's this really kind of shallow, vindictive. We never really see anything positive about Bertha Dorset. How he could have had a adulterous relationship with her that went on, I guess, for 4 years, and she wrote him all kinds of letters. Now, maybe she he realized he made a mistake, and then he spent a long time trying to get rid of her or whatever. But the idea of their being together seems somewhat incongruous based on what we hear about her as a character. I mean, we never really get a very visual image of her as a character, but we just know that she's totally untrustworthy and pretends to be Lily's friend, but then stabs her in the back at least twice in the book. So Selden, I mean, Newland Archer in The Age of Innocence, he had an adulterous relationship before he got engaged to May Welland, but it was kind of the thing that guys did in their 20s before they got married. They might have an affair with someone, and I guess, but we never know about the woman that Archer has a relationship with, but we do in The Age of in the House of Mirth. So I don't know. Did that strike you as incongruous, or did that go right by you?
I don't think it really ruffled my feathers too much. I mean,
there's nothing really about Bertha Dorset. In fact, the name is kind of faintly repellent, Bertha.
I guess I was just so focused on Lily, I didn't.
Yeah.
It didn't.
Well, it could
really
be,
resonate with me.
I
think I was really, to be honest, I think I was really taken in by Lily.
Yeah.
Probably more so than it sounds like you were.
Well, I think the first time I read it, I was like, totally invested in her struggles, and every time people turned against her or stabbed her in the back, I was like, oh my God, that's terrible. And I still felt that way, but I guess I knew the story, so it wasn't quite as vivid. But it's really disheartening, the betrayals that she goes through. She has a kind of a Christ nature in her, the abuse that she absorbs for her friends turning against her, betrayals.
Oh, yeah. I think that's why it's such an enrapturing story. And, obviously it takes a massive toll on her conscience and leads to all sorts of insomnia. And I don't want to spoil it, but, I guess I can relate to her inner anguish. And I guess I got caught up in that aspect of the book. You've read it many times, so I think you can think a little bit more about these other characters and inhabit their perspectives a little better than I can. But I got totally sucked into the character of Lily. I suppose perhaps that was the point. Perhaps I was manipulated.
Yeah.
But I didn't mind it so much. I really enjoyed it.
Well, I think she is kind of a scapegoat figure for the sins of her society, because the whole point of the book is to illustrate how frivolous society. Let me read you the quote that she wrote in her autobiography, this description of how she wrote the book, and she said, in what aspect, or she's asking a question, in what aspect could a society of irresponsible pleasure seekers be said to have any deeper bearing than the people composing such a society could guess? And the answer was that a frivolous society can acquire dramatic significance only through what its frivolity destroys. Its tragic implication lies in its power of debasing people and ideals. So it doesn't matter if you do all these stupid things, but when people who actually have values and beauty and meaning are crushed by this world, then it attains a significance that it doesn't have if you're just showing them partying all the time. So it takes someone like Lily, who's sort of a intruder on their world, because she has much more traditional values. She doesn't betray her friends. She makes herself beautiful. She believes in goodness. There's one point in the book where she says, "I want to do good in the world. I want to use my beauty for positive effect in the world." And I think that's sort of Wharton herself speaking. But the world that she's living in, everyone is just using each other, and a lot of them are having these affairs that they shouldn't be having, and it's kind of like a big game. to see how much fun you can have without getting in too much trouble.
Right. Well, something that I encountered a lot in the critical literature were discussions of the Simon Rosedale
Yeah,
character
yeah.
and the potential anti-Semitic overtones. Um, they're there. I didn't think they were. I didn't think it was in your face, but it's there.
Yeah, I
Um,
think she represents pretty much the attitude of her world at the time. I mean, she's not condoning it. She's not saying it's good. She's not criticizing it. It's just he is a wealthy Jewish man who wants to move up in society. And for Lily, he's kind of the worst choice because he's Jewish, which means, he's an outsider who wants to be in. And we don't really know much about him except that he owns the building that Seldon lives in the beginning. I guess he's got wealth in real estate. But there was kind of anti-Semitism was just sort of something you breathed in the air at the time. There was a lot of new Jewish immigrants in New York and in the rest of the country from Eastern Europe and elsewhere. Of course, Edith Wharton had, very close Jewish friends. She was very good friends with Bernard Berenson, the art critic. So she had no prejudice against Jews, but her book reflects the attitude of the period and the outsider status that Jews played at this point in the world of money. It's interesting though, because I read an interesting article that one of the influences on this novel is a book of Trollope called The Way We Live Now, which is from the 1870s, describing a famous Jewish or a shady financier named Belmont. No, what was I'll remember his name in a minute. Anyway, it was considered Trollope's best book about the rot of British society in the 1870s with all these stock market scandals and corruption and stuff. And this main character is kind of roughly modeled on Disraeli, this upstart Jew who became the prime minister. So I think Wharton may have. I don't know if the Rosedale. He definitely is not modeled on any character from that world, but there was this. She picked up some hints about what a corrupt society was like from that book of Trollope. She was a big reader of Trollope, of course. She don't think she met him ever. She was probably too young to have met him. But Rosedale, is kind of almost like the most noble guy besides Seldon. I mean, he's honest about his desires to rise in society, and he's honest towards Lily. He doesn't betray her. I mean, he just wants to use her to get ahead in society. Of course, he admires her because she's beautiful. But there's nothing, corrupt about him per se, as there is about someone like Gus Trenner. Because everyone is kind of trying to crawl all over other people to get ahead or to make money.
so what should we say to the contemporary reader of this text? I mean, why should we tell them that they should have some sort of interest in this? Is there anything about something from the turn of the century that is relevant to our own times? Something that
Well,
they can identify with?
well, I think as we said earlier, if you read this book and you read The Jungle, you realize what the consequences of a vastly unequal society are. And I think we're living in an age of extraordinary inequality and just staggering amounts of money collecting at the top. And just the kind of, if you read books about the lives of the rich and famous, you're bound to come upon very similar stories as you find in this book. Of course, you wouldn't find it in the life of, Bill Gates or some of these more well-behaved billionaires, but you definitely find these scandals in some of the lives of, our more disreputable moneyed class. Of course, the action now is still in Wall Street. I mean, I think the message here is that Wall Street money, I mean, this is still with us. Wall Street versus the people, corporate versus people. And this is kind of the social manifestation of the values that dominate that world. I mean, it's kind of interesting because the scenes in New York, you really don't get that vivid a sense of New York City. You don't get descriptions of the streets of New York and the houses and the carriages going by or whatever. You pretty much are inside most of the time. So you don't really see the city visually. But the world in the background is definitely, Gilded Age New York City with these rows of mansions on Fifth Avenue, these famous hostesses and their worlds and their parties and whatnot. So the scandalous lives that you find in the book are modeled on what you would find if you read a bunch of Gilded Age biographies, and also of some of the more disreputable billionaires today, I think. So it reflects. I mean, it's an important landmark of early 20th century literature. It's Wharton's first great book. But it really teaches you that we kind of been here before in terms of vast inequalities and what it does for people's values.
Nothing new under the sun,
Nothing
right?
new under the sun, yeah. Everything comes back.
To quote more wisdom literature.
Yeah.
Now, this was interesting to me when I was going through some of the commentaries, is that there's a real debate, and maybe I should think about it more. There's a real debate about the demise of Lily Bart, whether or not she committed suicide or if it was accidental. I get, if you haven't read the book, I just kind of blew it. She, what's the name of the drug? Is it called chloral or floral?
Chloral, yeah.
Chloral. She takes a sleeping medication, and she's at her max dose, and she has a particularly bad fit of insomnia. And she thinks, the chemist told me if I take one drop more, it could totally dash me to smithereens. But that's like a 1 in 1,000 chance. She does it, and she doesn't wake up, right? So, I mean, to me,
I think it's
I guess I just kind of I didn't see it as a suicide. I saw it as someone who was
make an honest mistake.
Yeah, it's just someone who was, I have suffered from insomnia for a long time.
Yeah.
And
yeah, exactly.
And I understand what it's like if you haven't slept in days or you're sleeping 2 hours a night. This happens. I'm sure Dr. Cook can relate to this as well when you're in grad school, you're pulling all-nighters and things like that. It's a horrendous feeling,
Yeah. Well,
to be deprived of sleep. I mean, I guess it's a form of torture in some places, right? Sleep deprivation. So I guess for me, it just obviously seemed to be an accidental overdose. But
yeah, I think
could you make the case that she committed suicide?
Well, here's the thing. I think subconsciously she could have been punishing herself for screwing up her life because she saw Selden. She made peace with Selden. She burned the letters that she could have used to get back into society by telling Bertha Dorset that she had them. So I think, in a way, she was sort of reflecting on how she screwed up. She could have married Selden, and at her moment of triumph after the tableau vivant, everything went to hell, and she didn't appreciate him enough. And his loyalty to her makes her feel guilty, I think, because she realizes how badly things have turned out. And I think, it may be that she has a kind of involuntary sense of self-punishment by adding that extra drop. But of course, it's nothing conscious.
So a subconscious death wish, subconscious suicide.
Or punishment.
I mean, it's an interesting concept. I mean, can you really kill yourself if you
without realizing
don't have an overt intention to do it?
I think it happens all the time.
Yeah, you're right.
I think people, they're very depressed. They're clinically depressed, and they're really up on the fence. They don't want to do it, but they think, God, I can't take this pain anymore. This is psychic pain, but they don't really want to do it. So I think it's very possible.
They're just kind of just playing Russian roulette.
Yeah.
Like, I don't mean to shoot myself in the head, but if the bullet happens to be in the chamber, and I guess I could see it in a certain light. Yeah. There's all sorts of people who are slowly killing themselves.
Yeah, the only ambiguity, though, or among many ambiguities, is that she's visited Nettie Strother, and she's had this kind of final redemptive view of what it's like to be married and have a child. And so the idea of killing herself after that makes no sense, because she sees, unless she thinks she's never going to have what Nettie Struthers has, that she is blessed by having a man that loves her in spite of the fact that she got pregnant with another man. That kind of total unconditional love, I think, moves her, and maybe she thinks that she never could have that unconditional love. She certainly didn't have it from her parents, and maybe she thinks Seldon didn't really love her after all. I don't know. Anyway,
interesting. Well, I think you explained it well. I think I find even though I think you're playing devil's advocate, I don't know if you truly believe that she committed suicide. I don't know what you really believe, but I think you've made a good case for it, better than what I've read elsewhere. Now, the House of Mirth, I guess, is considered a form of contemporary naturalism. Can you explain that?
Yeah, well, 1905, American literature has the older tradition of people like Henry James. William Dean Howells, of course, is kind of a tastemaker and a novelist. Mark Twain, of course, is alive until 1910. But that's the older generation. The newer generation, of course, are the naturalists like Frank Norris and Theodore Dreiser and Stephen Crane, who are younger than Wharton. But they were writing the trendy, important books of the 1890s, Red Badger Courage, Dreiser, Sister Carrie, coming out. So these are novels that pretty much have a structure that insists that hereditary and environment limit people. I mean, they're deterministic. If you're born in a certain world, you're going to end up, on the trash heap if you're born into a lower class world. Of course, Lily Bart, her history is kind of fatalistic, and she does end up, in a terrible place. But people are not limited by their environment. In that Nettie Strother, of course, escapes from this lower class environment. I mean, she redeems herself with a husband and child. So I think the novel mixes realism, some romanticism, and naturalism, which was the up and coming literary tradition of the start of the century.
So it's a chimera. It's not
So
solely.
You wouldn't consider it one. I mean, in a broad terms, it's a novel of manners, which is about studying the mores of the upper class, which includes Henry James and just a few other people. Not that many novelists belong to that world, but it definitely has naturalistic features in the sense that Lily kind of feels like she's a prisoner of her world. She can't get out of it.
Right. Right. So, I come from a philosophy background. I study, many things outside of that. And what's really wonderful is that I don't know what's kitsch, what's out of style. Being kind of autodidactic in other realms, I don't know if I'm reading good things or bad things. All I can tell you is that I really love The House of Mirth stylistically. And I wish I could write like Edith Wharton.
Yeah.
Is it kind of the fact, if I were to go into a lecture hall of the 100 top English scholars and profess my love of House of Mirth, would people roll their eyes? Would they be like, "Oh, that's so obvious. Like, it's so juvenile. Why would you?" Of course, someone of low IQ like you would like this book. Or is it still held in high esteem today?
Well, Edith Wharton has become a classic. I mean, she kind of in the middle of the 19th century, she was known as an author of one or two books, but I think in the last 20, 30 years, she's been appreciated for her whole oeuvre. She wrote a bunch of great short stories, many short stories, and I think people just have to admire the intellectual and dramatic excellence of her writing, and the fact that she describes such a big swath of society in the late 19th, early 20th century. So she definitely is worth reading, even the lesser known works. I mean, she wrote a ton of travel books, and she wrote a book about how to decorate houses, and she wrote a autobiography at the end of her life, a backward glance, which is well worth reading. So I think her reputation is just continuing to grow as a writer. And of course, there have been movies, about her work. I wish there'd be more movies about some of her other lesser-known works.
I saw that they made a play of House of Mirth, but it's not like the novel. I from what I understand of the play, it starts out showing that she's dead, and so everything that happens in the play you can see building up to her death. Whereas for me, when I was reading the novel, it caught me off guard.
Yeah.
And it gripped me more. Well, who was the name of the person who made the play?
I'm not familiar with it.
It was sounded. Just give me 1 second. It was.
Is this very recent?
No, I think it was.
Like in the 21st century, late 19th? I mean, late 20th?
I think it was in the 20th century. You can keep talking while I look it up.
Well, one of the other things that I should say is that the book sold 140,000 copies in the fall of 1905. It made her $500,000. So it took off. I think it was a kind of a sensational book at the time, and it kind of solidified her relationship with Scribner's, which was her publisher at the time. Of course, Scribner's well known for publishing Hemingway later on.
Maybe the play was done very.
Well, there was a dramatic version. There was a dramatic version that never went very far. She collaborated with a guy named Clyde Fitch, who was a well-known playwright at the time. But the play version never did anything. And there have been a few other dramatic versions. There was a British dramatic version in the 90s. And then I don't think there's been much since the movie in 2000.
So it's driving me crazy. Well, anywho, if anybody else is interested in it, was it?
What?
if anyone's really interested in it, they can look it up. I'm doing it on the fly here, and I'm getting mixed results. But uh, that was one of the criticisms that I heard about this particular adaptation is that it kind of spilled the beans at the very beginning. So you had a different psychological experience knowing that she was going to die. I could see that being interesting, or maybe you have that experience when you read it the second time. I mean, when you've read it the second, you've probably read it in who knows how many times you've read it now, but do you
Well,
see like it building, building, building? Can you are you're
no,
looking?
no, I don't. I mean, this time around, I her decline. It happens very quickly. I mean, she goes from being a social secretary to a woman. Norma Hatch, who's sort of a society climber, and she leaves that job to become a work for a milliner, to fancy up ladies' hats, and then before too long she's out of that job, and so her descent happens very quickly. So I don't think we're really ready for it. We're not thinking that it's going to be that quick or that drastic throughout most
Yeah, I
of the
mean,
book.
she starts out at what 29
Yeah,
in the book, and she's
yeah,
dead by 31. Is
yeah.
that right?
Takes place over 17 months.
Yeah,
So she kind of drops through a hole in her society, which of course can happen. We all know people who kind of sort of disappear and just fall through the cracks, lose their job, marriage, whatever.
yeah, yeah. Maybe that's why.
uh,
Maybe that's why I was so focused on Lily. Um, been there. Um, well, I is there anything else you want to say about the book
no, I
in
think
closing?
we pretty much covered everything that I wanted to mention about the
Well,
book. But
yeah, I think it was a fantastic conversation. I think many people derive great benefit from this. I'll have this edited and uploaded late tonight or early Monday morning for our loyal listeners. Um, Also, you could be listening to this 100 years from now. And eventually, I'll upload all this stuff to the Noetic app, noetic.app, and you can download that for your iPhone and Droid devices. I want to thank you all for listening, and thank you, Dr. Jonathan Cook, for having this conversation today. Brings
yeah,
such a wealth of knowledge to all of these issues.
yeah,
I,
it's a pleasure.
you know, I just devour and voraciously read so much. I don't get to just really stop and ponder these things all that much without having an interlocutor like yourself. It's not every
Yeah,
day that you get to have someone of your pedigree to really talk about these issues, and I'm deeply thankful for that.
yeah. Well, I'm happy to be of service.
Yeah,
Okay.
and I think again, what was the name of the
The,
title?
the the mother's recompense.
The Mother's Recompense looks to be the one that
Yeah.
we'll discuss next, and we'll get off air and try to figure out sometime in October or November to do another episode for you all. So thank you for listening, and thank you, Dr. Cook.